Son of man, I have made you a watchman. Whenever you hear a word from my mouth, you shall give them warning from me. Ezekiel 33:7. In a world asleep at the wall, this space exists to sound the alarm, expose the darkness, and equip believers and seekers alike to see, speak, and stand. I'm your host, James Prosoco, Christian, husband, father, veteran, and watchman. And tonight's episode is about the quiet war being fought for our attention, our thoughts, and ultimately our ability to remain spiritually awake in a world that profits from distraction. There's something I think we've all noticed, even if we haven't fully slowed down long enough to put words to it. Most of us move through the day with constant information, a constant stream of information flowing into our minds from the moment we wake up until the moment we try to go to sleep. We reach for the phone, the tablet, the computer before our feet even hit the floor in the morning. We scroll through the updates while standing in line. We answer messages during conversations, and we fill every single moment, with another piece of content. And none of that sounds dramatic on the surface because it has become the normal thing to do. And that's part of the problem that makes it so difficult to examine clearly. The thing that shapes us most deeply are often the things we stop questioning. And as I've been paying attention to this in my own life, I've realized this conversation is not really about technology alone. It's about what happens to the human soul when silence disappears and attention becomes a marketplace. What concerns me is not simply that technology exists or that we use it often. Technology isn't evil. I think we need to be mature enough to say that clearly without turning every difficult conversation to fear or panic. We can use these tools to encourage people, to learn, to build relationships, to share truth, to share the gospel, and to stay connected across distances that the world has never seen before. It was impossible generations ago. But at the same time, we also have to be honest enough to admit that something deeper is happening beneath the surface of this convenience. If something consistently and constantly pulls our attention away, shapes our reactions, and influences our emotional state, then eventually we have to ask whether we are still using the tool freely or whether the tool itself has started to quietly train us. And I say that carefully because I'm standing inside the same exact struggle. I'm not speaking from it from a distance. I've had to confront those same habits, that same compulsive scrolling, and the same restless mind that many of us know better that we want to admit. And one of the things that keeps returning to me is how quickly we now move on from one thing to another without ever sitting with anything deeply. We consume headlines without context, conversations without reflection, and we get outraged about the things that we're hearing without even understanding what they are. We're constantly reacting, constantly absorbing, moving, and after a while, the pace itself begins shaping how we think. And Scripture speaks directly into that kind of formation, even though we know technology itself didn't exist in biblical times. Romans 12:2 says, "Do not be conformed to this world. Be transformed by renewal of your mind." Paul is describing influence. He's describing the slow shaping of thought and desire and our identity. And when I look honestly at the amount of influencing information and data entering our minds every single day through screens and algorithms, I don't think we can treat this as a casual thing anymore. And there was a moment not too long ago that forced me to confront this, and this is why I'm talking about it tonight. It was very personal in a way that I felt very uncomfortable. I remember just sitting down after a long day. I just wanted to rest for a second, and then I found myself grabbing my phone and checking messages. And what happens is it turned into almost 2 hours of scrolling through videos, news, comments, random content that I didn't even remember afterwards. What stayed with me was not the content itself, but the condition that it left me in. I felt so crowded. My mind felt so disoriented and it didn't feel settled. I felt emotionally tense without even knowing why. And when I finally put the phone down, I realized I had consumed all that information without gaining any actual clarity or any peace from it at all. And that stayed with me, and it exposed something that I didn't really want to admit, that I was not choosing in a thoughtful way anymore. I was reacting automatically, and I think many of us recognize that feeling more than we really want to say out loud. And this is where the watchman's mentality becomes so important, because Ezekiel 33 is not about yelling at people from a distance or trying to prove moral superiority. The watchman sees danger early enough to warn others because he cares about people. That posture matters. It means we cannot talk about cultural problems while pretending we're not untouched by them ourselves. We're part of the world. We're part of the problem. We see it and experience it in the same way. And it also means that we can't ignore obvious patterns simply because they have become socially acceptable. A watchman pays attention before speaking. The watchman notices where people are drifting before destruction becomes visible. And one of the things we are drifting towards right now is a state of constant distraction that makes spiritual attentiveness increasingly difficult. I see it all the time. I see it in every aspect of my life. At home, at work, in the church. I've sat there in the pew and watched people bring out their phone and scroll during the service. Now, I want to pause here for a moment, because this truth becomes personal really quick if we let it. There are times when many of us sit down to pray, read scripture, or simply think honestly about our own lives, and within seconds, the mind starts searching for stimulation. We reach for the phone almost automatically, not because there's an emergency waiting, but because stillness itself has become so uncomfortable. And that should concern us. And that's not because silence is morally superior to technology, but because the inability to remain present reveals something deeper happening inside us. And I say that with genuine care, because I know what it feels like to realize your attention has been fragmented over time. This doesn't happen overnight. It happens one distraction at a time until eventually it just feels familiar. It's just normal. Jesus says in Matthew 6:21, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Most of us hear that verse connected to money or possessions, and that certainly matters, yes, but attention is a form of treasure too, isn't it? What we continually give our attention to eventually shapes our inner life. So that doesn't mean every moment online is harmful, but it does mean our habits are never spiritually neutral. We become shaped by what repeatedly occupies our focus. And when our minds are trained to expect endless stimulation, we should not be surprised when patience weakens us, when reflection becomes difficult, when relationships begin feeling thinner than they used to, because we're not being aware. We're not paying attention. And this is not about shame. It's really about awareness. We cannot guard what we refuse to notice, right? And something else that stood out to me about how these systems often amplify whatever keeps us emotionally engaged the longest. I've noticed this a lot, that anger spreads quickly because outrage keeps people watching. Fear spreads quickly because anxiety keeps people returning. And comparison spreads quickly because insecurity keeps people scrolling. None of that is accidental. Entire industries are built around capturing and monetizing human attention. And I know that might sound obvious when we say it plainly, but I think we often underestimate how deeply repeated exposure affects the human spirit over time. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life." Scripture consistently treats the inner life as something requiring intentional guarding, not passive exposure. I've noticed how this affects the way we speak to one another. Conversations have become increasingly reactive, impatient. Many of us are communicating in environments designed for speed rather for understanding. We respond before listening carefully. I see that all the time. I know you do too. This is that whole concept of how we train ourselves to listen. We listen to respond instead of to understand. We assume motives before asking questions. We debate publicly while struggling to have an honest, private conversation with the people that are closest to us. And again, I'm not standing outside of this problem, pretending that I've mastered it, because I haven't. I've had moments where this distraction affected how I present myself to my family, my friends, how deeply I listen to someone speaking, or how quickly I move through a conversation without slowing down long enough to actually understand the person's heart. And those realizations are very humbling. And they're important because accountability has to begin internally before it can become a warning spoken outwardly, as the watchman is required to do. So there's a practical side to this that matters deeply, because conversations about spiritual formation can become abstract very quickly if we never bring them into the ordinary life. Imagine sitting with a friend who quietly admits they feel mentally exhausted all the time, constantly anxious, unable to focus, and strangely disconnected, even though they spend hours every day online around other people. So the easy response would be to lecture them about the screen time or discipline. But that usually pushes people further into a defensiveness rather than helping them think about it honestly. When the healthier conversation should be, I've been noticing similar things about myself too. The watchman has to start internally. I can say I start realizing my mind never really resets anymore. Have you felt that tension too? That approach matters because people open up when they feel understood rather than being analyzed. The same thing applies inside our families, our friendships, and churches and communities. We need space where people can speak honestly about how distracted, overstimulated, or emotionally drained they feel without being treated immediately like they've done something wrong. Galatians 6:2 says, "Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ." That includes burdens that are cultural and psychological, not only visible cries. We are all navigating an environment that constantly competes for our attention, and pretending otherwise does not make anyone stronger. Safe and honest community begins when people can tell the truth about what they're struggling with without fearing some kind of immediate condemnation. And I really think this is also where discernment becomes extremely important, because not every moment requires speaking immediately. Sometimes the watchman warns publicly, and sometimes we don't say anything at all. We hear this in Scripture, right? There's a time to keep silent and a time to speak in Ecclesiastes. We need that balance right now because constant noise has trained many of us to react instantly to everything we see and hear. But reaction and reacting to something is not the same thing as discerning something. Because wisdom often grows in stillness before it does spoken. And if our minds never slow down long enough to think carefully or pray honestly or reflect deeply, then eventually we begin confusing emotional impulse with spiritual clarity. And I've experienced that myself. Some of us have become so accustomed to constant stimulation that being alone with ourselves and our thoughts feels threatening. Because the silence starts surfacing unresolved fears, exhaustion, loneliness, spiritual distance, and that endless scrolling temporarily covers over that. And I'm saying this very gently because I know how that experience is. I know how human it is. Many of us are not simply avoiding boredom, we are avoiding stillness because stillness often reveals the things that we have not dealt with internally. But healing rarely begins through avoidance. More often it begins when we finally become quiet enough to hear what is happening inside us. I mean, clearly. This is one reason Jesus consistently withdrew into quiet places through the gospel. You see it all the time. The Son of God himself modeled rhythms of stepping away from the crowds, demands, and constant noise. And that doesn't mean isolation is the answer, but it does mean uninterrupted stillness has spiritual value that we constantly resist. We need moments where our minds are not being directed by notifications or advertisements or headlines, endless commentary. We need time and we need room to pray without multitasking. When's the last time you noticed yourself praying and having a thought about something you had to do while you were praying? When's the last time you sat honestly before God without immediately reacting or reaching for some distraction? And again, that's not pointing the finger. It's simply a question. For me personally, this has meant making smaller but intentional changes rather than dramatic declarations that usually fade away after a week. It's like starting a new diet and going all in, stopping everything. You're going to eat nothing for a month. And instead, you end up eating everything in sight after 3 days. But for me, it's meant putting away the phone during certain moments, certain times of the day, instead of carrying it into every conversation or moment. It's made me pay attention to the different types of content that affect my mind, both emotionally and psychologically, how it makes me feel. It's meant resisting that urge to fill every single silent moment with noise. And none of that has been perfect, I can assure you. Some days I still catch myself slipping into those old habits without thinking about it, but even that awareness matters because change often begins with noticing what previously operated on autopilot. So brothers and sisters, watchmen, as we continue these conversations together, I think the deeper we go, the deeper questions underneath all of this is not simply whether technology is useful or harmful. The deeper question is whether we're remaining spiritually awake while living inside the system designed to keep us constantly distracted. That tension requires honesty from all of us. It also requires some humility. It requires communities where truth can be spoken calmly and received thoughtfully. And it requires the kind of watchman posture that Ezekiel describes, a willingness to pay attention carefully enough to warn one another with genuine care rather than fear or condemnation. So tonight, maybe the invitation is simpler than we expected. Maybe it begins with paying attention to one moment tomorrow when that hand reaches for the phone automatically, and not punishing or condemning yourself for not turning it into a performance or some guilt. Just noticing it, honestly. And asking yourself in that moment, what's driving that impulse in the first place? And whether that constant stimulation has become more normal to us than silence. And those small moments will reveal the larger pattern over time. And reclaiming attention, even slowly, may be one of the most important spiritual practices many of us need right now. This is the Watchman's Call. And as we keep walking through these conversations together, the goal is not fear of the world around us, but clarity within it. The goal is to remain awake, remain grounded and spiritually attentive in our culture, in a culture that constantly pulls us in every direction, trying to dissuade us from who we belong to, from our spiritual selves. Technology is not going away. It's going to continue to evolve, right? We know this. Platforms are going to continue to grow and change, and the noise is going to continue to get louder and louder and increase. But our call, the call of the watchman, stays the same. To stay alert, to guard your hearts, and help one another see clearly before distraction slowly becomes blindness. This is the Watchman's Call. God bless, and thanks for listening. As always, you can follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Patreon, or you can check out the website. The website is always attached to the description in the Spotify podcast. Have a wonderful rest of your week. God bless.